Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Energenomics. This is your host, Richa Mishra. India is using two main plans to build a modern, self-reliant economy. Its semiconductor policy and its energy policy. Together, these policies aim to boost tech manufacturing, shift to clean energy, stop relying on other countries, and in making India a global hub. To understand the nuances, I spoke to Mr. Anuj Narain, Vice President, Power Development, Power Semiconductors, Cyient Semiconductors, where he leads the development of next generation intelligent power solutions. Thank you, Mr. Narain, for spending some time with us.
Thanks, Richa, for having me.
Today, everyone is talking about semiconductor policy and India's energy policy. And it is said that India's semiconductor ambitions are directly intertwined with its national energy policy. I wanted to understand from you, how is it so?
There's two ways to answer that. For most people, when you say semiconductors and energy in the same breath, the first thing that comes to mind is a lot of power. And with India, especially, the thing that's perceived as, hey, our power infrastructure is not good enough to have semiconductor fabs, and that's been the narrative for the last 30 years, which has really prevented us from having large scale wafer fabs in India. So that's one way, and it's justified because if you look at a modern 300 millimeter fab, it draws hundreds of megawatts of power. Put that in context, some of our best nuclear power plants in India are about 500 megawatts. Sardar Sarovar, which is, flagship hydroelectric plant, is almost 1200 megawatts. So you're looking at, fabs that take 200 or 300 megawatts of power, and the power projects themselves are not big enough really to support a large deployment of fabs. Now, the other way of looking at it is power delivery, and which is really the way that Cyient is approaching this problem. And we're looking at it and saying, India has power infrastructure. We've reached small villages, and I think our government has done a good job of getting the light bulb on in the smallest remote places in India. But we are among the lossiest power delivery networks in the world. If you look at, just what is lost purely in delivery in India is about 20 to 22%. So what Cyient is saying is, hey, I've got 20 to 22% that's just lost to delivery. If I can recover that with the really smart, intelligent power solutions, semiconductor solutions specifically, I immediately have much more available power for the load consumers and continue to fuel India's ambitions.
So my connected question is, as we are aware that there's a power demand, and in certain states are offering various incentives also for the players to come in. I mean, luring them to come in, which is fair enough. It is an opportunity which everyone is looking at. But from your perspective, are there challenges in executing both in India? I mean, both together in India. I would rather rephrase my question and say, are there challenges in executing both together in India, particularly structural bottlenecks?
So, structural bottlenecks do exist, and I would say this is not an India-specific problem. Distribution companies world over, have limited finances. They're usually very large organizations that have to manage maintenance and repairs on massive grids. And it's the same in India with our state boards. The average amount of time they spend just to keep the lights on probably consumes most of their resources. Now, Having said that, that's really no reason for us to not make progress. Looking at, like I said, with power delivery, there's, you've got AC, that's being transmitted at very high voltages in the megavolts, for example, in the kilovolts, sorry, across the country, and then that gets stepped down to a low voltage AC, that gets stepped down to a even lower voltage lines AC, and then that has to be converted to DC to run a lot of your appliances and other things. So there's this massive chain of losses, and expecting the grid infrastructure to be redeveloped overnight is unrealistic. It's happened maybe in the case of one recent country that I can think of, but otherwise world over it's the same problem. Now, I like to look at structural bottlenecks largely in the context, for India at least, with comparing it to our telecom revolution. India has a massive landline infrastructure. We've built it over decades. And it's unreasonable, to think that, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the mandate from the government was, let's go upgrade all our landlines to fiber and make them really fast. But what the government did was they said, this is not looking impossible. We cannot replace every wire and every switchboard out there. Why don't we create policy that's friendly to the private sector to go leapfrog? And there's no need to modernize our landline infrastructure. We'll go directly to mobile. And what happened there was interesting, because now suddenly you had private players that were able to set up cellular networks which were not dependent on the landline infrastructure. We didn't have BSNL go off and create the mobile champion of the world. We had the private sector chip in. And this is something that is very similar to power, because if you look at how did we get cell phone reception to the remotest part of India, it's because we put up cell towers that had generators and car batteries. And if you think about it, they were independent cells that were not dependent on the power grid. They were not dependent on the landline grid. And so we were able to leapfrog that revolution. In my opinion, I think, structural challenges will remain. I would say it's not a reason to wait. It's a moment to leapfrog those challenges.
So that's quite optimistic way of putting it, and we Indians are optimistic always. But my next question, just takes forward what we were just talking, is how are the stakeholders dealing with it? And, I would like to add on to it is that, do you think microgrids can be a solution, looking at the demand which your industry has?
I like to look at infrastructure as part of the problem. Like I said, it's obviously it's what you have today. It's part of the problem. Now, if you break that up, there's several different problems here. There's an infrastructure problem, but there's also a semiconductor problem, which is why Cyient is so and is investing so much into power. It's because you can decide you want to leapfrog. And there are solutions in the world, that system level solution that help you to leapfrog. But if the semiconductor content that you have to make that leapfrog is still coming from overseas and is being imported, you can only move as fast as your supply chain allows it. If there's a blockage on a certain product or shortage of a certain product worldwide, your modernization plan will suddenly come to a halt. So, you have to look at this as an infrastructure problem, a semiconductor problem, a chip design problem, product problem all together, and try to solve that, solve the whole puzzle so that you've got a nice, robust plan that you can execute to. So microgrids are obviously a very interesting, angle to solve this, solve the transformation that we need. I like to look at microgrids as three different angles, I would say. The first is generation. The renewable energy push in India is massive, right? We've got almost 500 gigawatts of projects that are being set up just from renewable energy. And this is a combination of, solar due to the abundant sunlight we have, or wind energy and other forms. Now, renewable energy like solar, for example, is produced in DC form. If you can avoid having to take that DC, convert it back to AC, transmit it over the grid, and then convert it back to AC when it's reaching the home, and then do a couple more DC conversions, you save 2 to 3% of losses in every stage. So I would say for a country with a large renewable footprint, DC microgrids just make a lot of sense because you're avoiding the conversion portion to get it to the load. The other part of it is storage. DC is very storage friendly. If you think about a battery, it's a DC mechanism of storage. When you have AC voltage, you're converting that to DC, and then when you want to use it again, you convert it back to AC. So it saves you a lot of loss in double conversion. And then the third part is the load and the usage. India's usage, if you just look at, where power is used in India, the two largest consumers are heavy industry, and pumps, which is because of our large agricultural sector. So I think there's something like 20 to 30 million pumps in India that are running at any given time. So both of these applications can benefit heavily from DC voltages. As manufacturing becomes more robotic, there's opportunities to build factories completely on their own independent DC grid. There's opportunities to convert the old 50 hertz AC motors that we have into more efficient DC motors. And then the big elephant in the room, which is data centers, where we're looking heavily to become one of the top data center countries in the world. That's all DC power. If you're having to convert it 10 times, you're suddenly going to be sitting with the same 20% losses before you even start processing a single token. So Cyient is really looking at DC very, very carefully. We've looked strategically at what does this independence from the grid scenario look like, and we're making all of the right investments in the semiconductor space to solve that power delivery problem. We refer to it as the first mile because it's the first mile from generation to the load.
Yeah, I'm glad you elaborated on the microgrid solution, and because the recent latest development has been how Andhra has facilitated it for Google. And
Yeah.
of course, I have my reservations on it because as a backup plan too, you are going to go to the main grid only, but that's another debate which can happen. My last question to you would be that, as you rightly pointed out, there's no ideal roadmap. And, it's not India specific challenge only. These challenges are there in other countries and in other places also. But coming from where you are and the position which your company holds here, what could be the way ahead? I mean, where do you players like you stand?
So, looking at just microgrids, the government already has initiatives where, they are starting to solicit offers for developers to start developing, robust microgrids. Now, what's interesting is I also feel that the India semiconductor policy has been extremely friendly for a transition like this. If you look at, schemes like the DLI or the RDI schemes from IT, what these are encouraging is for players like Cyient and others to really innovate in the semiconductor space. And in our case, we're looking at power as where we want to play. And these schemes will really help accelerate us where products are available in India from an Indian manufacturer, and we have independence from imports essentially to make this happen. So it's a combination of government policy at the system level, the grid level, and then also on the semiconductor level. What lies ahead, I think, is a lot of ambition, which is very typically seen in India when we're at crossroads. For Cyient, specifically, there's kind of there's few angles we're taking to this. We realize that power is not, power is not low voltage and power is not high voltage. The biggest, way you can solve a problem is look at the complete chain, look at all aspects of conversion. So, we are working on kind of, I would say, three main initiatives today that are already in motion and we've already started making investments on. The first is working on custom power and especially on custom high voltage power. And our aim really there is to look at, grid down to workable voltages in the DC space and solve any problems from grid down to, almost to the line level, going into the house or going into the load. So that's one aspect. We've got decades of experience in power where we're starting to really build our chops in the high voltage and high power space. I feel we're in a good space there. The second is, our collaboration with Navitas. So, every high voltage system in the world today, especially the modern ones, use wide bandgap semiconductors. India is extremely dependent today on imports for wide bandgap, whether it be gallium nitride or silicon carbide. So our partnership with Navitas really helps us open up that domestic ecosystem for wide bandgap, because I feel high voltage and wide bandgap have to coexist. There's very little chance of success if you don't have the wide bandgap technology. So we're investing heavily there, and very soon, customers will be able to go to an Indian company with an Indian source. We've already made announcements on the parts. So that helps solve some of the high voltage challenges. As we also acquired a company called Kinetic Technologies. We closed in early April. And what Kinetic really brings to the table is power management. So they have 250 products, 100 plus patents in the space of power management, and that will really help complement everything we're doing on the high voltage side with a much stronger medium and low voltage offering. So really just to summarize it, I think a combination of good semiconductor policy from the government, a really good energy power delivery policy from the government, and then, private players like us making the investments in the semiconductor space will really help India succeed in the future.
So basically, to sum it up, what we're trying to say is that we are on the right track. Things are happening. It may not happen immediately, but the entire ecosystem, if it is synergized and goes together, then we are looking at brighter days ahead, vis-a-vis both the policies going together is concerned.
Like I said, the leapfrog is what we have to keep an eye on. If we try to solve the infrastructure problem overnight, that is going to be a challenge that takes decades of transformation. But with the right policies in place, with the right semiconductor ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem, I feel if we continue this environment, we're on the right track to transforming the energy grid in India.
So basically, it's never too late. We are there and we will reach our goal. So thank you so much, Mr. Narain, for sparing this time with us.
Thank you, Richa.
This is all we have in this episode of Energenomics. Till we meet again. Thank you. For the first-time listeners, Energenomics is a podcast and video series which focuses on decoding the complexities of the energy sector. We try to examine how geopolitics, government policies, and economic shifts impact energy prices and security. Through the episode, we try to dissect and demystify the issues which have a direct impact on you and I.